What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over the must-own tight ends. While many of the players on this list aren't going to cost heavy draft capital in order to own them on your team, the reason for that is because the players that we have on this list are overall the ones we feel strongest about as targets for 2020. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which wide receiver with at least 100 targets had the lowest ADOT. The correct answer, D.D. Westbrook. Congratulations, GT, you got this one right. Today's stat of the day, which tight end with at least 5 targets inside the 10-yard line posted the best catch rate in that area. Also, guys, if you didn't know, we are going to have one extra episode a week. Not available on YouTube though, it is going to be available audio only, so any podcast form or Spotify. It's going to be a Q&A segment, so if you want to submit your questions, you can do so at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And while you're there, consider signing up for our draft package. All in-access members are eligible for exclusive giveaways courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction. That's just one of many benefits you'll get in our package that's guaranteed to help you win your league. With all that stuff out of the way though, let's jump right into the video, and the first player I wanted to talk about is Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos. Now, Noah Fant's rookie season isn't going to blow you out of the water, but again, rookie tight ends, they typically do not perform well for fantasy in year one. That's just across the board. Even the best of them are hardly usable fantasy assets, and Noah Fant, he was no exception. He did finish the season with 40 receptions for 562 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, which as a whole is respectable, but in order to cast our full judgment on Noah Fant and how we expect him to do as we head into this season, we have to look a lot further than just at the overall numbers from last season. The first thing you would want to look at is his overall involvement in the offense, which was very promising. He played on a higher percentage of snaps than any rookie tight end, had 4 or more targets in 9 of 16 games. So while he was on the field, he was being targeted, and he proved to be one of the few tight ends to consistently show off his deep play ability. There were 2 games in 2019 in which he was able to amass over 100 receiving yards, adding in a touchdown as well. And in nearly half of his games, he was able to put up a deep play himself, with a 20-plus yard reception in 7 of 16 games. Even going back and watching the film from his 2019 season, it's easy to see that this kid's got it. It shouldn't have came as too much of a surprise to anybody, just considering his athletic profile is through the roof. At 6'4", 249 pounds, he's a 97th plus percentile athlete in every measurable category, runs a 4.5 40, even boasted 98th percentile catch radius, and his most comparable player in playerprofiler.com is George Kittle. While we aren't expecting George Kittle type production from him this season, where he's being drafted is definitely of value, and Noah Fant does mix in the potential upside of somebody who can be one of the league's top producers. He finds himself on an offense, one that's definitely trending upward, under second-year quarterback Drew Lock. They also added Jerry Jeudy in the draft, one of the more talented wide receivers in the whole class, a draft class that was very wide receiver heavy. They also brought in veteran Melvin Gordon to help the backfield on this team play much more consistently. While Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay are strong and capable backs, both of them struggled in areas in which you probably wouldn't have expected. Royce Freeman getting outshined on the ground by a much smaller running back in Phillip Lindsay. Then Phillip Lindsay regressing in some of the areas that were his strong suits, that being his receiving ability, being outpaced by Royce Freeman in areas like catch rate as well as yards per reception. So in comes Melvin Gordon to show these two young running backs what it's like to consistently do both and succeed in both areas consistently. And overall, while it may be a backfield that's better to avoid than to target, you can almost guarantee we're going to see much more success on the ground, helping to move the chains and setting Drew Lock up for plays to be made in the receiving game. Young quarterbacks, they do tend to rely on the tight end position, and the connection between Drew Lock and Noah Fant was one that was trending upward towards the tail end of the season. In the final 4 games, Noah Fant caught 9 of a possible 10 targets that came from Drew Lock. If we do see that type of connection continue to be built upon, Noah Fant's negative aspects, like catching 1 of 9 possible red zone targets, is an area we can see vast improvement on as we head into the 2020 season. For those reasons though, Noah Fant is definitely one of our favorite tight ends to be targeting, especially in the later stages of the draft. But let's move on to the next player. We're going to move over to an early round guy, and that is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. Clearly a player that we've been talking about for not only this entire offseason, but last offseason as well. Last year, he was a late round pick, but then he followed that up with a monster season, averaging 11.2 half-point PPR fantasy points per game. He posted 852 receiving yards on 64 receptions and ranked second in the league when it came to receiving touchdowns. Now, ultimately, that did land him at a spot of the draft where you are going to invest heavy draft capital into him in order to land him on your team. He's the third tight end off the board behind only Kittle and Kelsey, and while that may scare a lot of people away from wanting to draft him that highly, he's still being drafted as the 41st overall player off the board, and Travis Kelsey and George Kittle are being drafted no later than 21st overall. So we're talking a minimum of 20 draft spots between him and the tight end being drafted ahead of him, whereas Zach Ertz, the tight end being drafted right behind him, is not even 8 picks separated between them. If you ask me, I would not be surprised whatsoever if Mark Andrews plays much similarly to the players being drafted ahead of him, that being Kittle and Kelsey, as compared to the players being drafted behind him, that being Zach Ertz and beyond. While this Baltimore offense admittedly is almost guaranteed to see some regression when it comes to offensive effectiveness, Mark Andrews is a player who can easily make up for that when it comes to his involvement in the offense. And it may come as a surprise to a lot of people to hear, he didn't play on a ton of snaps last year. In fact, 54 other tight ends played on more snaps than he did, and we're simply not expecting that to occur once again. His usage may not be up to the levels of the elite tight ends and their snap percentages, that being 90+%, but when you consider he only played on 44% of his team's offensive snaps while still performing as the TE3 in fantasy points per game, that leaves a lot of room for growth. They got rid of Hayden Hurst in a trade over to Atlanta, and Hayden Hurst was a player that played in just 2% less snaps than Mark Andrews did in 2019. Not only did he play in 2% less snaps, he actually outsnapped Mark Andrews in 7 of the 15 games Mark Andrews played. Hayden Hurst, being a first-round pick, almost forced the team to try to get him out there as often as possible to continue to develop the young player. You can't reasonably put out a third-round tight end over him consistently without giving him an opportunity to grow and develop, and that's exactly what they had to do in 2019. Without Hayden Hurst in the picture, though, you can guarantee Mark Andrews' involvement is going to go up, and maybe the touchdown rate may decline, but this is also a player who's heavily involved in the deep receiving game for this offense, and is easily the receiver who has the best connection with the young quarterback Lamar Jackson. The next player we have on this list is TJ Hockenson of the Detroit Lions, and I'd be a liar if not a large part of it had to do with our infatuation with this Detroit Lions offense as we head into 2020. But when you go back and look at what Matthew Stafford did while he was healthy in 2019, there is certainly a reason for it. He did play in only 8 games, but that makes it easy to stretch out to a full 16-game season if he were able to keep up that pace, of course, and he would have compiled through 16 games at that pace, 4,998 passing yards. So just under that 5K mark, a mark we've seen him hit through his career. But what would have boasted even better was his touchdown to interception rate, which would have been at 38 touchdowns to a mere 10 interceptions. Clearly, he was playing at an MVP caliber level. Would that have been good for MVP? Definitely not when compared to Lamar Jackson, but through the air, there was no quarterback that was passing better than Matthew Stafford. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is where we see this volume going in 2020. It's an easy question to answer. When you look at the roster, you have Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, the backs out of the backfield who are very capable receiving backs, and then lastly, it's going to be TJ Hockenson. Remember, the tight end position as a whole, it doesn't require a ton of volume in order to produce top 10 numbers. In fact, the tight end with the 12th most target in the league last year only had 76 total targets in 2019. Matthew Stafford was on pace for over 580 attempts, and that wasn't even an outlier or high when compared to his 5-year average leading into that. 582 attempts was in fact his 5-year average heading into the 2019 season, and the peaks and valleys throughout those years weren't showing much variance either, with a low of being 555 pass attempts and a high of 602. So to expect he can't throw for another 580 attempts again this season wouldn't really be a good bet to take. So we know Hockenson is going to be on an offense that's almost guaranteed to be top 10 when it comes to passing volume. Marvin Jones, the receiver who's guaranteed to garner a higher target market share ahead of him, has been banged up each of the past 2 seasons, missing 3 games last year and 7 games the year before that. Who's to say he can even stay healthy in this upcoming season? If anything were to happened to Marvin Jones, TJ Hockenson would have the type of upside to compete with any of the top 8 tight ends. And as it stands, in order for him even to be at a top 12 receiving level when it comes to volume this season at the tight end position, he's only going to need just over 13% of his team's targets, a number that he should easily be able to compile. We can't forget this is a first round talented, a very gifted athlete, especially one who was known heading into the NFL as not really a blocking tight end, one who definitely needed work done in that area as opposed to his high-end receiving upside. The next player we have in probably one of my favorite players to be drafting is Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans. I've really loved the talent of this player as we've seen him throughout the years. Unfortunately, he has been playing behind Delanie Walker, who pretty much is an Iron Man at the position. Delanie Walker guaranteed to be a non-factor, which leaves Jonnu Smith to come in and take the reins and potentially prove himself as one of the top contributors in this offense for 2020. As an athlete, he's extremely gifted. He comes in with good size too at 6'3", 248 pounds, 88th percentile 40-yard dash time, 84th percentile speed score, 94th percentile burst score, and an 82nd percentile catch radius. Most comparable players, David Njoku, someone we've never seen emerge, but one who's undoubtedly very gifted in the athletic department. Now, one thing about Jonnu Smith's play is he is one of the best tight ends in the league in yards after catch. He's very George Kittle-esque in that area. 62% of his yards came after the catch in 2019. Compare that to 70% in 2018. So clearly, this is a player who, if you get the ball in his hands in some space, he can do some damage. He's shrugged off defenders and would-be tacklers on several occasions. All you have to do is look up his highlights to see many examples of that. And that skill set fits in very, very well to what the Titans are trying to do as they head into 2020. What was one of the main benefits of having AJ Brown on the field for Ryan Tannehill was if Ryan Tannehill could set him up and get him in space, AJ Brown would do the rest. Well, Jonnu Smith is another player who can bring that same similar skill set to the table. And for a player who doesn't need as much volume in order to produce because he's getting most of his production after the ball is in his hands, that leaves massive upside if we can see him as one of the top 8 targeted tight ends in the league, something that is very possible that we could see happening for 2020. So we do have one final player on this list, and it's Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. And unlike other players that we do have on this list, Mike Gesicki doesn't need a whole lot to fall in his favor, excluding what we saw last season, in order for him to be a good pick for fantasy football. Last season, he did finish as the tight end 11 when it comes to his finish in fantasy points, but he also ranked 7th in targets, 12th in receptions, and ranked top 12 in many other major categories, including receiving yardage and receiving touchdowns. But the best part about those stats is that they were very heavily weighted towards the tail end of the season. Clearly somewhat of a product of not having Preston Williams, who did serve as the wide receiver 2 on this team, but there's no reason that we shouldn't believe that Gesicki can still remain a safety valve for Ryan Fitzpatrick and this offense, and potentially Tua down the road if that's what the team sees fit. Through the final 6 games, Gesicki averaged 8 targets per game. His catch rate wasn't phenomenal throughout the season. It was still sub 60%, something they definitely could work on for 2020, but a 16-game pace of 8 targets per game would be a massive 128 targets. 128 targets is elite level when it comes to volume, up there with the likes of Kelsey, Kittle, and Ertz. While it's not realistic to expect it, that is the type of upside Gesicki will bring to the table. We also can't forget exactly how elite this player is as an athlete. I know a lot of the tight ends we put on this list are exceptional athletes, but Gesicki takes the cake. 96th percentile 40-yard dash time, 95th percentile speed score, 99th percentile burst, 99th percentile agility, and 100th percentile catch radius. Many of his measurables did rank among the top 10 out of all tight ends within the past decade. He also comes in at one of the tallest tight ends we have on this list at 6'6", weighing in at 247 pounds. So not only does he come in with that elite athleticism, he also comes in at a size which is guaranteed to cause defensive mismatches. Right now he comes in as the TE13, which leaves plenty of room for upside when you consider Miami could once again be one of the teams throwing the ball more than any other team in the league. You're also combining that with an elite athlete as well as one who was showing progression when it comes to his involvement in the offense towards the tail end of last year. Definitely something they can build upon in 2020. So for us, Mike Gesicki is a no-brainer pick in the later rounds, but that's going to do it for this video, guys. We really hope you enjoyed. Once again, if you do have questions, be sure to submit them on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. If you did enjoy this video, how about hitting the like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.